of our story are linked together. And we'd have a game loop where we have a current page variable that you can think of as a pointer that points to the object representing the page that we're on right now. Inside the game loop, you'll have the current page display that page's text, which is its part of the story, and display the choices that the player can make. And then, depending on what they type in, you'll ask that page object which of the choices corresponds to what the user typed. That page object will give you a link to the next page, and you can update your current page variable and repeat the same process over again. So in terms of our original plan, we'd had a page object that had those variables and these methods. And we're done with all of them except for this last one, get the next page for a user's choice. So that's what we're going to implement right now. But before we do, I want to quickly compare the code from last time to this kind of pseudocode plan for how the game loop is going to look. So last time we ended here on the left with code that looks like this. I've inserted a little bit in the pseudocode because there's one important thing that we didn't put in the pseudocode because we didn't think about it. At the very, very beginning, we've got to create all of the pages and link them together. We have to have the full structure for the story that we want the user to be able to move within before the game loop ever starts. So on the left, you can see in that same green box, we create 3 different page objects, the starting page and a page for text about a waterfall and a page for text about an ogre. And then we add the 2 choices to the starting page that would lead to the waterfall page or the ogre page. I'd suggested last time that you add several more levels of the story here in the green. And this is enough that we'd actually probably want to make this its own method called initialize texts or initialize story. And then in blue, you see that we're displaying the current page's text and choice, but we didn't actually make the game loop. We don't yet have actually a current page, and we don't have any way to update the current page. So that brings us to now. So let's start by adding in the game loop to the code. Well, actually, let's do this. Let's add a page variable called current page. Here we're just declaring it. We're not actually initializing it with a value. After we do all of the creation, we're going to set what the starting page should be. So let's do that here. So current page equals start. And all I'm doing is I'm taking this variable here and assigning it to be the current page, which is what we start with. Now we want a game loop. I don't know what I want to say in my while statement, so whenever I'm not quite sure how many times I want it to loop, I'll put true there. And what that's going to do is it's going to loop infinitely, which is not what we want to do eventually, but is a great placeholder so that we can at least get some of our code down, and then we can come back and think about when would we actually want to stop. Before we go and edit this any further, let's actually make the simplification I'd suggested. All of this, well, let's see. So this is in main. So let's actually organize it this way. I'm going to cut this and paste it up here. So the current page is going to be a variable that you can access anywhere from this entire class, not just the main method. And I'm going to make it public static. Now, instead of having all of this code here, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a method called initialize game. And we haven't made this method yet, but we're going to create it down here at the very, very bottom. So this curly brace here matches with the starting. You can see it right there, the starting of public static void main. So you want to find the end of public static void main, and we're going to make a new method called public static void init game. Oops. Did I call it a init game or initialize game? Initialize game. And now we're going to cut and paste all that code. So all of this code that's about creating the pages and about linking them together, oops, and about the current page, all of that is now going to go inside this one method. And the reason for doing this is to organize the code so it's kind of easier to think about. All of this code has to do with setting the game up, and so I don't want to have to look through all of that setup before I see my main game loop here. So let's just double check that all of this makes sense. So I'm still creating all my pages, I'm still linking them together, and then the very last thing I do is I set the current page to the start page. An important thing to note is that all of these page variables, you won't be able to use these variable names outside the method. Because they've been declared inside the initialize game method, that means that they literally don't exist outside of this method. But it's okay, because as soon as you link the start page to the other pages, the pages you've created still have references to them. So even though you can't talk about waterfall anymore, now the waterfall page has been linked to from start, and so you can still get to that waterfall page. All right, so here inside our game loop, we're displaying the text for our page, except now we don't want to display it for the start page anymore. Now we want to display it for whatever the current page is. And same thing here. Now let's go ahead and paste in what we had in our original hello world, where we have the user type something. So I'll paste that here. I'm going to fix the indentation. And before we had these if statements as a way of deciding what to do next, that's not going to work anymore. And the reason why is because what you're going to display and what happens next depends on what the current page is. So at the very start, the only choices are go left or go right. So you could test left or right. But as soon as you do that and you go to a new part of the story, now what's inside your if statements needs to change. So that's why we can't actually use if statements here. Instead, it's like we have to put the if statements inside the page object itself, because each page is the one that knows how it links to other pages in the story. So instead of this, we're going to have what I'd suggested in the slides. We're going to have a line that looks like this in the highlighted yellow. We're going to get the next page object for the user's choice and assign that to be the new current page. So the right place to ask where the next story point is asking the current page itself. And we haven't written this method yet, but let's call it getNextPage for choice. And then we give it whatever the user typed. So the way to think about this is we have the current page display everything that it's got. Then we have the user type in their choice. Then we take whatever it was they typed in and we give it as input to this method, whose whole job is to give us the next page. This method has all the if statements and decides if what the user typed actually leads somewhere or doesn't. And then it will give back a page that becomes our new current page. We've done enough that we should probably test to make sure that it still works. Before we do, though, we want to actually implement not this method the way we want it to work eventually, but a kind of a placeholder version of this method, getNextPage for choice. So let's go ahead and open the page class down at the bottom, public. It's not going to be void. Let's come back to that in a second. getNextPage for choice. The input is a string, user choice. And right now, let's just return this. This is a keyword referring to the current object. So whatever page is running this code, we're just going to return that page itself. Because the whole point of this method is it needs to give back the page object that the user is going to go to next. So what that means is I can't return void here, because void means there is no return type. So instead, I want to return a page object. Okay, so this is just a placeholder version that's going to let us actually test main again. So let's go ahead and run it and see how we feel about the way that it looks. Here's what mine looks like when it runs. It displays welcome. You see a path left and right. Type the number for the choice you want. So I'm going to type 1 and hit enter. And now it displays the same thing because we haven't actually created the part that links it to another room. But that's good because at least I can see that the loop is working. Really important that you go up here and stop your code from running, because right now you're stuck in an infinite loop and it's never going to stop unless you stop it. All right, come back next time in the next video and we'll take this the rest of the way out.